There's so much excitement for small modular reactors around the world. Use limited resources on what actually mattered, what could make the most impact quickly.
Tell me a little bit about the space of startups in the nuclear industry.
I think we already have plenty of reactor designs out there, but not enough of them are being built. That's what I would say to people: stay curious and learn about things outside of your own sphere, especially if you want to make a pivot. The nuclear industry right now is very dynamic. Your passions will get to where you want to go.
Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Going Nuclear, here with a very special guest, Lenka. She is part of the world of nuclear startups, Helixos. I'm really excited to chat with her. Last time we met was at IYNC in Australia.
In Sydney, yes.
In Sydney, yeah, 2020. It was a really fun year. So Lenka, welcome.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here and talking with you today, especially after seeing each other 4 years ago now. And that Sydney conference was very dynamic and exciting and right before the pandemic. So it was a good time to be there.
Yep, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get into the industry? What's your background? And what inspired you to launch your own startup?
Yeah, it really starts back with, I decided to study nuclear engineering when I was going to university. And the reason for that was because I grew up in the US, but my family is originally from Slovakia, which is a small country in Central Europe. And they are small, but we have nuclear power plants there. And my family's from a town that's from very close to one of those nuclear power plants. So I always grew up around it and was really interested in nuclear, even going into university. And I thought I wanted to be an engineer. And what happened is it was during one of my classes, a class on radioactive waste management, where I thought we were going to talk about the technologies that we need to take care of radioactive waste. And of course, we covered that. But what was really interesting is that we also covered the non-technical aspects of radioactive waste management in the nuclear industry. And that's when it clicked for me, is that you can be a great engineer and engineer the perfect products, but if they don't get to market, then no one's going to use them. And often the trouble we have in the nuclear industry is with some of the non-technical aspects like business, policy, and communication. So I decided to focus my career more on those aspects and worked in the government, in the nuclear industry, and then ended up in Australia and decided to start my own company because there isn't a large nuclear industry in Australia. So I basically had to create my own job if I wanted to stay in the industry. And so I started Helixos to focus on those non-technical aspects of commercializing nuclear technologies, both nuclear energy with traditional fission that we use today, but also with fusion, something new that we hope to have around the world soon.
Tell us a little bit about Helixos and also the Australian market. Like, is Helixos only targeting the Australian nuclear industry, or is the breadth of its services wider? Tell us a little bit about what you guys do.
Great. So at Helixos, we focus on the commercialization of new technologies. And what we do is we work on strategies, we work on communications and technical advisory with different clients, including in government, in the private sector, national laboratories, end users, and startups, as well to help them on this commercialization journey of nuclear technologies. And so that can be things like market research. For example, we've helped National Laboratory take a look at the advanced reactor market and where they should be focusing their research to best help industry and bring new technologies to market. And then in the fusion space, we recently developed a plasma power framework, which is how countries could consider deploying fusion energy now with R&D programs or in the future once fusion is commercially available. So those are some of the examples of things that we've worked on internationally. But you might know that Australia has a ban on nuclear energy, so there is not a huge nuclear industry in Australia, but we do still do some work there in nuclear medicine because there is a there's a reactor for medical isotope production in Australia. And there's also a new nuclear engineering program at the University of New South Wales. So that's something that we've been helping them expand that program and hopefully prepare for a future nuclear energy program or maybe even fusion.
Oh, wow. That's really exciting. And that's phenomenal. It's really cool to see that variety of subject matter expertise coming from Helixos. In regards to the subject matter expertise and bringing that expertise together, tell me about that journey, like lessons learned from your time in the industry and applied to a nuclear startup. What was that transition like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think often we get these narratives of founders, leaving college early and going to start a startup right away. But in reality, most startup founders actually have some experience in the industry. And that's probably the better way to go because you can get some real experience and actually know what you're doing. And some of the things that I learned in industry, especially going from engineering into strategy, for example, is that I was working for an SMR developer doing business development, external relations, and there's so much excitement for small modular reactors around the world. And we had to figure out within our strategy how to really narrow down those opportunities and use limited resources on what actually mattered, what could make the most impact quickly. And so that's part of that, learning that strategic process of having the idea and long-term plan and vision of what you want to do, but really honing down to figure out what are those next steps that we need to do this year and next year in order to get to that long-term vision. So that's a really important aspect of that strategic planning that can be learned in industry. But yeah, again, I really encourage people to get some experience in industry before going out and starting a startup. And you also don't have to be the founder. You can join a founding team, and having that primary team to start a startup with is really essential, and trying not to go at it alone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's some really good advice. I think there's a lot of romanticism, I would say, right, around, dropping out of university and building your own company. But I think the stories that should be shared are yours, right? Like the ones where you have the industry experience, you have built up that subject matter expertise, but also you have that broad breadth of network in the industry that you can bring together to build that startup. So I guess tell us a little bit about that journey. Like, has IYNC enabled you to develop that network? Like how was that experience like?
Yeah, IYNC has been really great in the past when I was really involved as a young professional to help build my network beyond the countries and the organizations that I was working for. And actually, in particular, I met the co-founder of Helixos and another one of our colleagues, our team members, through IYNC. So it really brought us together, brought that exchange of ideas together, and helped us form this international team that we have today. So definitely encourage people to get involved and reach beyond their own spheres for idea generation, but also to meet great people that you can potentially even start a startup with in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And, another question I have for you is, when it comes to nuclear startups, they're kind of rare, right? I don't really see a lot of startups in the nuclear industry. There's a lot of big organizations like, Westinghouse, GE, Hitachi, like organizations that have been operating for 100+ years, right? Tell me a little bit about the space of startups in the nuclear industry. How dynamic is that space? How is that growing? Like what trends do you see?
Yeah, I think the nuclear startup space has actually grown quite a bit in the last decade or so. We've seen, and I think this has been because we've seen more private capital and VC funding going into the private nuclear industry and helping create an ecosystem in which you can actually make a nuclear startup. But a lot of these startups have been in designing new nuclear reactors, for example. And I think we already have plenty of reactor designs out there, but not enough of them are being built. So if people are considering starting a startup in nuclear, maybe you don't need another reactor design, but consider what are the gaps we see in that deployment pathway to actually get these built. So I have seen recently more companies cropping up that will actually be project development companies for these new designs. And I think that's a really great idea. And it's even part of our long-term vision to hopefully be involved in that actual deployment aspect in countries around the world.
Yeah, that would be really exciting, right? Like being involved and, getting those shovels into the ground. So right now at the moment, would you say Helixos is a consulting firm?
Yes, we're a consulting firm, but our long-term vision, so our vision is ideas to impact. And we're working really on that ideas front, the design development front, and then getting closer and closer to that impact and actually getting advanced reactors built and even fusion power plants built. And so our long-term vision is to be involved on that entire pathway of technology commercialization, from that idea generation to then actually building new technologies, new facilities, and operating them and providing clean energy to people.
That's a really exciting vision, and something I think it's awesome to see you work towards. What words of advice would you have for folks that are part of the young generation nuclear community? What would you say in terms of career advice for those ambitious youngsters that maybe want to start their own startups one day?
I think the first thing to do is to figure out what your core skills are and how you can best apply them to the nuclear industry. And maybe that's through working for those traditional nuclear companies. Maybe that will be through startups or even starting your own startups. But I think really figuring out what it is your core skills are that you can add to the nuclear industry and then honing in on those. I think that's what really makes people valuable in the industry, when you're working on your passion, when you're doing things that you're good at. And another piece of advice is the decisions that you make today will shape your future career, but you can always pivot. I've worked in diverse parts of the industry, which I think has made me better in terms of understanding the industry from that high level perspective. So it's not just about the decisions you're making today, and you can always change your career and going to something else as well. So having that open mind and being able to get diverse experience is really key to then making an impact on the industry.
I think you're the best example of that, right? Like having that background in nuclear engineering and then doing roles like, stakeholder engagement and communications. Tell me a little bit about how were you able to get that breadth of experience, that diverse experience? Because I know sometimes when you're working in the industry, it's easy to get I would say pigeonholed sometimes, right? Like you kind of get stuck in one technical area, and then it's hard to branch out into diverse types of roles. So, what would you recommend? Like how did you do that?
That's a great question. And I think what it comes down to is I'm a very curious person, and I always encourage other people to be curious as well and learn about other things. So like I said, I started in engineering, but I ended up pivoting to business, policy, and communications. And something that interested me in the beginning in that was the psychology behind why people think the things that they do about nuclear technology. And so I got very curious, started digging into the social science behind it, and found it very interesting. And eventually that passion is what led me to being able to pivot my career to those more non-technical aspects of it. I also did more formal things, like I got an MBA and had an internship in the communications field, just to show the people or the jobs that I was applying to that I was serious about doing a role that was different to my past experiences. So that's what I would say to people: stay curious and learn about things outside of your own sphere, especially if you want to make a pivot or are interested in doing something else.
How do you recommend people learn outside of their current roles? Is it through podcasts? Is it through books? Or do you think more formal methods, like maybe doing a part-time MBA, is the route?
Mm-hmm. Everyone has a different learning style, so it really depends on the way you like to learn. I do listen to some podcasts. I've recently got much more into watching YouTube videos. You can find anything on YouTube these days. So it's probably the best place to start, is right here on YouTube. And then let that lead you down the path of what you might need to do to pivot your career. So maybe that is doing something more formal, like taking formal education, doing an MBA program like I did, but you don't necessarily need to. I think there's so much information out there now. It's finding what makes you passionate, how you learn best, and finding the information that's out there.
Some thoughts that I always have is like subject matter expertise versus being kind of a jack of all trades, right? There's benefits in each. There's security with subject matter expertise sometimes, right? What are your thoughts on those two streams of like strategies in terms of career development?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great dichotomy to dig into a little bit more, and different people will tell you different things as to what's the right path to go. And it ultimately depends on what you're working in. So I would say I'm more of a jack of all trades, but because I work in strategy. So you need to have this high level view of the industry and know a lot about different topics, but most importantly, being able to see from that bird's eye view. But at the same time, in strategy, you need to be able to hone in on topics in order to make decisions. And so what I would say, it's if you're wanting to work in a role that's more high level on the industry, you need to be a jack of all trades, but then decide what those topics are that you do want to be an expert in, and you can become an expert in those topics. And so some of those for me are stakeholder engagement, communications, and developing policies, and then also strategic planning when it comes to the business. And so those are the three areas we've also focused on in our company at Helixos. But we still have that overall bird's eye view of being able to do the overall strategy. So a little bit of both, but I think for people, it'll really depend on what their role is and whether they need to be that subject matter expert all the time. But I think everyone will benefit from being able to have a bird's eye view of the company or industry that they work in as well.
That's a really great example of, utilizing both those methodologies in terms of like the day-to-day work that you do. In terms of industry trends at the moment, I'm sure your team has a really good pulse on what's new and what's relevant in the industry right now. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm. The nuclear industry right now is very dynamic, and we're in the best place that we've been since I've started in the industry 15 years ago now. So what we need to do is capitalize on this incredible momentum that we have in the nuclear industry and actually start building lots of new reactors in the US, in Canada, in Europe, and then many other parts of the world as well. And Asia's already doing a great job at this as well in terms of actually putting boots on the ground and constructing new plants. So I think it's a really exciting time to be in the nuclear industry, and we're also seeing the business model evolve. And so we mentioned these new startups with new reactor designs coming into the field. Many of those are microreactors, which is going to completely change the way we deploy nuclear energy, and having new types of end users, new locations. And this is both exciting and requires changes in governance and things like harmonizing regulations around the world to be more like the aerospace industry, for example. So we're seeing, I think, good excitement, good momentum, but we need to also make changes in order to completely capitalize on the environment and the incredible technologies that we have today.
Yeah, definitely. I like that, the healthy dose of optimism, but also let's stay grounded and let's take things step by step, right? Focus on the essentials. So that's great. Well, I think this was a really great chat. I think this topic is really relevant because there's a lot of young blood coming into the industry, and the new generations that have a different mindset. They really appreciate the flexibility and and the creativity that comes with startups, right? So I think this conversation was really inspiring for me, and I'm sure for the viewers as well. Is there any last thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience?
Thanks so much for having me on today. The last messages I would like to impart on people is that to stay curious. I think that's one of our key values at Helixos, and also passion. You need to be passionate about what you do. And I know people say this a lot, but following your passions will get to where you want to go in your career. But that's what's so exciting about the young people coming into the industry today, is that they really are passionate about this technology, passionate about making the world a better place with it. And at Helixos, that's what we're trying to do as well, is really help people work on these technologies, get them to market, and hopefully be deploying lots of advanced reactors in the future, but also fusion power plants. So it's a really exciting time to be in nuclear, and it's great to have this chat.
Yeah, thanks again. Really appreciate this discussion. And for those that are watching, please do check out Helixos in the link below. And thanks again, Lenka. And till then, take care. Bye.
Thank you.